So currently Manchester City have a very, very big problem on their hands, and this comes after the 2-2 draw that they had with Arsenal, because Rodri, their star player, ended up suffering an ACL injury, and I think now it is probably confirmed that it's actually an ACL tear. So it's now been announced that Rodri will miss the rest of the season, and Pep Guardiola ended up saying the season is over for him, and then he also went on to say we don't have a similar player. So this is now Pep acknowledging that that defensive midfield slot is going to need a bit of a replacement, and a bit of a very good replacement, especially for the rest of the season, because Man City don't have a player who can really emulate Rodri in any way. So now Pep will need to find a replacement for the rest of the season. He's basically going to have to wait until the January transfer window opens, and that means City are going to have to go through the next dozen games, probably a bit more, without Rodri, and they're going to have to adapt very, very well, because that backline is exposed a bit more now without Rodri kind of coming back and taking some of the pressure off them and helping out defensively. Plus also he's a quality defender as well. So yeah, with Rodri not being able to take the pressure off the defence, it'll be interesting to see how Man City go without Rodri for the next dozen or so games until the January transfer window opens. Also, alongside this, it will be interesting to see if Man City permanently buy someone or if they loan someone in for half a season. So get ready for that rumour mill to start buzzing with Manchester City going after defensive midfielders, because that is going to start very, very soon. It probably already has started now, to be honest. So now that Rodri is out for the season, the question on people's minds is, how vulnerable are Manchester City now, if vulnerable whatsoever? So the context here is that Manchester City have not lost a game with Rodri in the lineup for the last 48 Premier League games, which is an incredible stat, and considering that there are some very, very good teams in the Premier League that could beat Man City, that is a very, very impressive feat, and it doesn't seem like that is going to go anytime soon, even when Rodri comes back. So since the start of the 2023-2024 season, Manchester City, and this is in all competitions, with Rodri in the lineup, Manchester City have played 51 games, they've won 37, drawn 13, lost 1, and that one loss came in the FA Cup final last year to Manchester United. They've gone on to score 132 goals, and they've gone on to concede 47 goals. However, when you go over to without Rodri, they have played 15 games, won 10, drawn 1, and lost a total of 4, scoring 39 goals and conceding 14. So these numbers here are quite interesting, because you see that Manchester City, they kind of just score under 3 goals a game, so like 2 to 3 goals a game that they'll average scoring. However, without Rodri, they concede a slightest bit under a goal a game, and then with Rodri, it's a bit less than that, kind of like around the same number, but it is actually less. So I think that is quite telling that with Rodri, they do actually concede a bit less, and a lot of those goals are actually conceded against the better teams. So when they go up against the lesser ranked teams, they really aren't conceding that much. So I do think that these numbers do show a bit of a difference, but I think to see the actual full difference that Rodri makes, you kind of need to look at the context a bit more to see who they concede against and how many goals they do actually concede, because when they play without Rodri, I think that they might be going a bit more defensive. So with that, the games that they've actually lost without Rodri are they lost 2-1 away to Wolves, then they lost 1-0 away to Arsenal. After that one, they lost 1-0 away to Aston Villa, all of those in the Premier League. And then in the Carabao Cup, they ended up losing 1-0 away to Newcastle. And if you look at these, it kind of affects how they score in these games as well, because if there's a lot of pressure on the defence and you can put pressure on the defence, then Man City obviously can't go forward. So in these games, they are very, very close games. It's not like the other teams are running away with the victory. So it is a very close game, and it's not like Man City are nothing without Rodri, and I think these 4 losses kind of show that Man City is still in these games. I think this just proves that Rodri is that kind of little bit that pushes Man City over the edge and really helps them push forward and end up putting teams away. So really, I think clearly Man City are better with Rodri in the lineup. However, I do think that they are a bit more vulnerable, especially now defensively without him, now that the defense doesn't have that support coming back from Rodri. So this is kind of the time for teams to kind of really step up and go after Man City and potentially get a win off them, because I think the last couple of games they've had, they've actually drew without Rodri, so the most recent games, and I think that's kind of a sign that they might be struggling a tad bit without him. However, I would still class Man City as the favourites for the title, but what I will say is it's a lot more of a toss-up now, because those teams that usually challenge Man City, if they can really push forward and start taking points off them, that gives them a much better chance of at least challenging or even winning the Premier League title. I do think that Man City will probably still go through and dominate the lower ranked teams. They just might concede a few more goals, but if they're still scoring so freely with players like Haaland, then I don't think that'll matter too much. I do think that when they come to play the higher ranked teams, so the teams in the Champions League places and even the Europa League places, I do think that that is when Man City could be vulnerable there to actually dropping points. So it'll be interesting to see how they play against the top teams now, see if they go a bit more defensive or if they continue going with how they usually play. And I do think overall it will also be interesting to see how Manchester City adapt overall without Rodri, because Rodri obviously being a Ballon d'Or nominee and one of the favourites for the Ballon d'Or, it will be interesting to see how such a crucial player being out will affect Man City and also affect their tactics, if it affects it at all, because Pep seems to be one of these mastermind managers. So I think it will be interesting to see if he changes the system. I think he will probably have to make some changes to the system, especially because with Man City not having a direct kind of replacement for Rodri. So will the formation change or will just the tactics change? We will have to see overall in the next few games, and Pep might have to experiment with a few as well, which is also another case of where Man City could be vulnerable, because when you're kind of going through tactics to see what works and what doesn't, that's when you can really take advantage, because it's not set in stone yet. They're just going through to see what works and what doesn't. So overall, I do think it will be interesting to see how Manchester City come out without Rodri in the next month or so, just before the January transfer window. So yeah, how vulnerable do you think Man City are, if they're vulnerable whatsoever, without Rodri, and how do you think that this will affect Manchester City's season overall? So yeah, leave all that down in the comments. If you like the video, leave a like, and yeah, so thank you for listening, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.